Welcome to The Explainer. There's a political battle raging over the Jeffrey Epstein case, and it's all about one big question. Who really pushed for transparency, and who's just now jumping on the bandwagon? Okay, so let's get right into it. The main accusation flying around is that certain politicians only started caring about the Epstein files when it was politically convenient. But is that really what happened? We're going to cut through the noise and look at the actual record. So this is one of the quotes that really kicked things off. The argument from Speaker Mike Johnson is pretty straightforward. The people making noise about this now were totally silent when a different administration was in charge. And it doesn't stop there. Former President Trump took it a step further, suggesting it wasn't just silence. It was that information was being held back on purpose. So you've got two pretty serious claims on the table. But do they hold up? Let's check the timeline. To really get what's going on here, we have to rewind the clock a bit. We need to look at what the political world looked like before this case just exploded back into the headlines in 2019. You know, it's kind of hard to remember now, but for a long time, when the media talked about Epstein, the conversation was almost always framed around one specific connection: former President Bill Clinton. And because of that narrow focus, a lot of other politicians, especially Democrats, just weren't really getting grilled on the topic. That context is absolutely key. But then 2019 happens, and everything just flips. A single bombshell report changed the entire game, and suddenly the pressure started cranking way up. And you can just see how fast the dominoes fell. The Miami Herald's investigation was the match that lit the fuse. Within just a few months, you got Democrats calling for records, a cabinet secretary getting forced out, and then, after Epstein's death, both parties demanding a full investigation. What had been simmering for over a decade suddenly boiled over. And at the absolute center of all of this was the 2008 secret plea deal. Basically, it was an agreement that let Epstein off with what many saw as a total slap on the wrist. He got just 13 months in a county jail, and crucially, was given immunity from any federal prosecution. This deal, overseen by then U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, became the lightning rod for all the outrage. And boy, did things get busy. The record from that summer shows a real flurry of action. This wasn't just talk, you know? They demanded Acosta testify. They pushed the Justice Department for its internal review. They wanted a House investigation. And they even started writing new laws to make sure a deal like that could never, ever happen again. And this quote here from Representative Ro Khanna, I think, really captures the feeling at the time. The push wasn't just being framed as a political issue. It was being presented as a moral duty to get answers for the victims who had been denied any sense of justice for so long. Okay, so let's jump forward a bit. What happened in the years after that first big push? Because how the fight for transparency continued and how it changed, that's the next critical piece of the puzzle. Now, this is the period that those initial claims of silence are all about. And it's true, some people did notice that the public calls from certain Democrats seemed to quiet down after President Biden took office. So the question is, why? Was it just inaction, or was there something else going on behind the scenes? Well, it turns out the explanation has two really big parts. It looks like the quiet wasn't just inaction. First, you've got the Ghislaine Maxwell case. The Department of Justice was in the middle of a massive federal prosecution and actually asked lawmakers to pump the brakes on their public efforts so they wouldn't mess up the case. And second, the focus shifted to protecting the victims who were worried about reprisals. And look, this isn't just a theory or some kind of excuse. Representative Lois Frankel put it bluntly. We were told by the Justice Department to cut it off. They were getting ready for a hearing and were told to stop. So this suggests it wasn't a political choice to go quiet. It was a response to a direct request from law enforcement. And on top of that, you have this from Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz, which is so important. The strategy wasn't just about legal maneuvering around the Maxwell trial. It was about the human element, a conscious choice to respect and protect the victims who were at the very center of it all and had real fears about what might happen to them. Okay, so we've walked through the whole timeline, from the early context, through that big explosion of activity, and into the strategic shift during the Maxwell trial. So what's the bottom line? What does the record actually show us? You know, when you actually lay it all out like this, the picture that emerges is, well, it's pretty different from those claims we started with. Far from silence, what you see is a consistent push that started way back in 2019. It didn't stop. The strategy just adapted because of a very active, very high-stakes federal case.
So the main takeaway here is pretty clear, right? The factual record doesn't show a sudden, convenient interest this year. It shows a multi-year effort that began in 2019 and simply changed its tactics along the way.
And that really leaves us with this final question to think about. In a case this explosive, this politically charged, and this painful, understanding the whole timeline is everything. It's what helps us start to tell the difference between a genuine, if complicated, search for justice and a well-timed political attack.